So one of my favorite things about the Develop in Swift materials is the teacher materials that come with each one. Today I'm going to show you a little bit about how to use Keynote to present those lessons back. This is especially useful if you're trying to get certified by Apple to teach app development with Swift, because we use Keynote throughout all the lessons. Nearly every single lesson in the book has an accompanying Keynote. So I'm going to try to help you present it as best as you possibly can. So first off, what on earth am I talking about? Where can I get these keynotes that I'm talking about? So there's an app called Books on your Mac. It also exists on your iPad and on your iPhone. And you can download these books here. So Develop in Swift Fundamentals, Explorations, Data Collections. There's an APC as Principles as well that you can download. And in the beginning of each book, we have a teacher's guide where at the very beginning, so here we're on Unit 1, but in the introduction we have a whole bunch of text about how to get set up, what we're going to teach in the material, how long it's going to take, what the pathway is. And at the end we have this download for teacher materials. So we can tap on that and it'll download a zip file. And in the zip file, it's got a bunch of resources for us. So here I've got my teacher resources downloaded here. This is the Xcode 12 edition, which just shipped in the last little while. And you can see that the structure mirrors the structure of my book. So I have Unit 1, Unit 2, Unit 3, and then Unit 4, Build Your App. We have some other resources in there as well, which is a Go Green prototype, which is another thing we can use Keynote for, is prototyping our apps and getting them in the hands of users without writing any code, which is a huge benefit when we're trying to iterate very quickly and just try out certain ideas. We're not going to focus on that today. That's for another talk. So in the first unit, getting started, we have a few different lessons. We have the introduction to Swift and Playgrounds. We have constants, variables, and data types. So if we tap into any one of those for each of these lessons, we have the playground. So this is the lab that the students are expected to work through. And it gives some great exercises for testing out, in this case, your knowledge of constants, variables, and data types. But in the resources folder, we have this constants, variables, and data types.key file. So if we double click that, it's going to open this file in Keynote on my Mac. So here we are. This is my Keynote file. I've got my thumbnails for each of the different slides that's going to come up in my presentation. I've got the slide itself here where I can edit things, change things around. Now, if I'm going to be teaching this stuff, I'm probably not going to change this too much. And then down here, I've got my presenter notes. So if you're missing any of these things, it's pretty easy to get them to show up. To get the thumbnails to show up, we would just go to this view item over here. And we can pick navigator, slide only, light table. Maybe yours looks a bit like this so that the slides aren't showing up. So if you pick navigator, the thumbnails for each of the slides will show up. You'll see in the thumbnails over here that we have a little bit of text in the top right corner of a lot of the thumbnails. That just means that there are presenter notes for those particular slides. You'll also note that there are 3 dots in the lower left-hand corner on some of the slides. That means that there are going to be animations on the page. So when we're actually presenting it and talking through it, we want to be aware that there are going to be certain builds that come up. So when we're tapping on the arrow to go to the next slide, we might get caught out and we might have an animation happen instead. So this is the whole list of all the slides that we're going to present in this lesson. It's a fairly long one. And we have our little script here. In fact, with these keynotes, I love them because they have a script already written for you, and they kind of help you with what you're going to present. So this is Keynote at a high level. If your presenter notes aren't showing up yet, you can go up to the View menu here and go to just hide presenter notes for me because they're shown. But if they're not shown for you, you'll see Show Presenter Notes, or you can use the shortcut over here. Now, if I'm presenting this stuff, I like to add my own notes in here as well. Just notes that I want to hit. or certain concepts I want to touch on, or maybe the story that I want to tell, because I'd like to tie this whole series of slides together. So you can edit these. You can just tap in here to edit, to add new notes. Maybe I forgot to mention constants last time, so I've left myself a note to say, all right, I got to make sure that I remember to mention constants this time around. Now, before we dive into how to present these, because that's how you're going to present them for class, I want to show you a couple tricks. So one thing that you'll note is that you'll sometimes see a lot of slides with, maybe you haven't developed them, but you'll see slides where we have quite a lot of text and a lot of code. So if we get to a slide like this, it can be really tempting as we're reading it to our audience to move our mouse over each line. This is where the presenter notes come in really handy, because it reminds us that, hey, we're going to talk about this stuff in detail later on. We don't have to go into it in great detail. The point of this slide is whatever the point is. Now, if there's something that I really want to highlight on the screen, and maybe I'm not as confident in my viewers' ability to read this slide as well, or to understand it, maybe they get too flustered, we can help focus their attention a little bit with some nice tools built into Keynote. So we have up here, we have the shape menu. Say I wanted to highlight one of these lines. I wanted to focus on the constants, because that's what we're talking about in this lesson. I might go and grab just a black square. I can drag this up here, drag it over. Now that's not super helpful because I've just hidden my text. So I want to change the attributes of this rectangle that I've just dragged out. So I'm going to go up to the Format button, and I'll drag this over to give myself a bit more space. And I'm going to change the fill to no fill so I can see the stuff behind my rectangle. And I'll add a little border so I can kind of highlight it. And here I can play around with the colors. All right, I don't have a good color in the built-in theme. Let's go with our color picker, and we'll pick a nice red. Maybe we'll bump up the size of that box so it's very clear what it is. So now I don't have to move the mouse over anything. I can just have that box highlighting a certain part of the screen, and I can give a hint to my viewers that, hey, this is what you should be focused on, is these constants. Don't worry about the other stuff. Maybe I want to focus down here. You can see this subtle shading here behind a person sort of highlights those constants that we have that are instances of our type. Now, if you want to make it more apparent that this is something you should focus on, you could animate it as well. You can do that by, I have my rectangle selected. I'm going to go to the Animate button here, and I can add different effects. I can add one where I build it in so it doesn't appear until this animation takes place. I have an action so that rectangle would be on the screen when I first land on this slide, and then something will happen with it. And then I can have it disappear as well. So maybe I want to just have it dissolve in, and it gave me a little bit of preview there. I can play around with the duration, with lots of different attributes of my animation. And if I have lots on the page, I want to make sure I go down to my build order and play around with them. I can make sure that they appear after I click. Maybe I want to have it appear automatically, so after the transition, and give it a delay of a couple of seconds. So there's lots of stuff I can play around with here. Now, as with animation of your app in general, it's best to use it judiciously. Don't go overboard when adding animations and adding extra text on the screen, because it just might distract from your experience. Okay, so that's how we're going to author our slides and how we can kind of get around our slides. I know when I'm going to present something like this, I'll typically have a few run-throughs where I kind of go through and I rehearse. Maybe these ones don't have any notes for me, so maybe I add my own. We can see when we get down to this screen, this is one of my favorite examples because we get to sort of interact with the audience a little bit. We have a script to say things, and then we have a series of things to do. And it has a note that we're going to click to display each. So we know that when we build this page and we're running it, it's going to have quite a few elements show up as we're working through it. And I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. Now, because we have a lot of animations on there, we can see we have animations from those 3 dots. I'm going to hit the build order, and we can see how they're grouped. So there's quite a bit of stuff going on this page to make it look pretty seamless when we run it. So this is how we're going to work through our slides. Now, we got to rehearse it. Once we have all of our slides built, and in the case of Develop in Swift Fundamentals anyway, we have all of our slides pre-built for us. The guys at Apple wrote a bunch of these for us. Now we have to practice them quite a bit. So we have a few different options. So you could watch the other video that we have where you can use your Keynote on your iPad or iPhone as a remote to control the one on your Mac. You can have a second screen like I do. So when we rehearse it or when we play it, we have our main slide on one screen, and on the other screen we have our rehearsal window. So it shows us the current slide, the next slide, the presenter notes, so I have my script there, just as a reminder of what's coming next. It also gives me a timer, which is kind of handy for knowing how long I've been talking on a particular slide. The last option, if you don't have a second screen and you don't have an iPad or an iPhone, and you just have the Mac with the one screen, you can present it in a window. So we'll take a look at that in just a second. First, I'm going to show you though. So if we go up to the play menu, we have a few options here. We can record the slideshow, which is handy for watching yourself back. Make sure you don't say too many ums or ahs. Make sure your whole slideshow flows really well. Like especially for these, when we're trying to teach this material, we want to make sure that we're telling a story and they each connect to the next slide. And there's a bit of a coherence to the whole thing. So one thing you can do is you can rehearse the slideshow. Now right now the screen looks a bit black because on my second screen, it looks a bit like this in here. In fact, I'll just play it for you so we can show you what it looks like. So this is what it looks like when you're rehearsing the slideshow. It shows you the current slide that you're on. It shows you what the next slide is, so you have an idea of how you're going to transition into it. Gives me a timer, gives me the actual time itself. And then the presenter notes down at the bottom. So this is really handy. And as I arrow through, I'll go back maybe to my type slide. When I arrow in, I can see transitions happen, see animations happen. And in fact, if I go back to this one that's very heavy with animations, we can see that it shows me the number of builds remaining. So it's going to darken the whole map, and it's going to show me the journey that we've mapped out. And we're going to play a little game called constant or variable. So when I hit the arrow to go to the next slide, that's what's going to be shown to my audience, is this constant or variable slide. And it shows me the next one. So that's going to be my first question to the audience is, all right, what's our starting location going to be? Is it going to be a constant or a variable? And we do a little bit of modeling. And we say, all right, great. Well, we've got our answers for that. Let's go to the next one. What about destination? Well, how would we model that one? Would that be a constant or variable? But Keynote lets me see the builds that are coming up next. And when I get to the end, it tells me I've got 2 builds remaining. One, it shows me the next slide that's coming up. So I can easily transition out of our little quiz into talking about the rules behind naming constants and variables. So that's the rehearsal aspect. So you can run through that and practice it and make sure you have the transitions down and you're not surprised by any of the animations. The other thing I want to show you, the last thing I want to show you today, is this play slideshow in window. So if you're stuck for whatever reason and you don't have a second screen, you don't have an iPad or an iPhone, you can choose to play the slideshow in a window. So here I have this window here. What I could do if I were teaching this course over WebEx is I could share just that window so that I know that that's what my students are seeing, is just this here, because we're going to play our little game. And then I also have this option up here. So in the play menu, I should see a show presenter display in window. So in WebEx, I would be sharing this Keynote window, and I would have this one open on the side so that I could still have my script there, and I can still see the builds remaining and all the other stuff. So this is just helpful if I need to present. I've only got one machine with me. I've only got the one screen, and I'm in a pinch. I really like having the second screen or the iPad, because the iPad is a really nice little teleprompter to look at the script. But hopefully this will give you a way to present the material and feel comfortable about it, because it's really nice having these presenter notes up in front of you so you know what it is you're going to be talking about. You can also, in addition to using the arrows, you can also tap here to go through the different builds. And again, I can't stress enough, if you want to add your own notes to the presenter notes, it's hugely helpful, because it's much nicer for us to let the slide do its talking about the rules than to have us read over the same material that the viewers can read themselves. So I might have a note here. In fact, this is cool. This is talking about Unicode, including emoji symbols. Make the code easier for non-English text. But these are some of the rules. Now we might, on a slide like this, we might go over the rules ourselves out loud just to cover them. Then we don't need to read through each one of these. We could just kind of mention the Unicode case. And then we roll into something like best practices. And it tells us to click to display the yes, no for our different best practices. So we don't want to have very short variable names wherever we can. We prefer to spell them out a bit. And then we have another build where we click again and it shows the X and the check to say that this is how we're going to use camel case to make sure that it's a readable name. And then when we're done presenting that, we can just hit the escape key. It gets out of playing mode, and then we're back to looking at our presentation again, and we can work around on that. So hopefully this is giving you a little bit of an introduction to Keynote. This may have been a review for a lot of you, but if you've never used a Mac before, you've never used Keynote, it's a really great tool for presenting information. Just make sure you do it in a nice, simple manner. Follow some of these tips that we gave you, and I'll see you again next time.